Okay, everyone, we are ready to get started with our next presenter. Next, we have Gloria Macia, and her talk today is entitled AI in Health, Achieving Regulatory Compliance. Please welcome Gloria.
So I was listening to the discussion panel we just had about regulatory issues, and it actually brought me back a memory from 2 years ago where I was at a conference about artificial intelligence and healthcare, and I just talked to a startup who had this brilliant idea of how AI could improve millions of patients' lives. And the team of this startup was mainly composed by scientists. So I asked them about their regulatory strategy, because that was the topic of my talk, and they looked to me completely clueless. And it suffices to say that that startup, unfortunately, did not make it to the market. And it's a pity, not because they lost probably a great business opportunity. It's a pity because some patients may have lost the chance of being with their families today. So I think that's, in a nutshell, what this talk is about, giving the perspective of a data scientist how you can successfully reach the market. And what's more, if somebody very wise were to ask me what very important truth do very few people agree with you on, I would answer the following, that if you understand regulatory strategy, if you understand the rules of a game that very few know, regulation is not a barrier, it's actually one of your greatest strategies. And in this talk, I want to show you why and also how. In a nutshell about me, I'm a data scientist, so I'm a technical person. I work for Roche. I think it's probably difficult to find in this audience someone who has not heard about Roche, but it would be even difficult to find someone who has not been treated by a Roche product. But in a nutshell, all you need to know about my company is that it has two big strategic divisions, which is pharma and diagnostics. And I work as a deep learning practitioner for the later one. Then a bit more about Roche. The diagnostics division has been key to this company's success since it allowed us to go from blockbuster drugs to targeted medicines. And we envision now a future in which each patient receives personalized healthcare. And of course, the billion-dollar question is whereas artificial intelligence can take us there. And I certainly think it holds the potential, but only if we realize about how to ask the right questions and how to frame those questions correctly to be able to answer them. So just before going into really the content of this talk, a short legal disclaimer, which is that the views and opinions and thoughts expressed during these presentations are solely my own and do not necessarily need to be shared from the ones of Roche. So I would like to start making things concrete with an example. And this is actually the example that that startup pitched like 2 years ago to me, which is that they had this AI, so software is a medical device, so they had this AI product that would inspect brain scans and diagnose brain tumors. And then they also had other ideas, like not only brain tumors, but maybe brain hematomas, and then even like expanding the intended use to other like neurological disorders. And then what I was trying to make them understand, and they were really struggling because they came from this scientist or engineering perspective, is that why this product could not, when from a product development point of view had been finished, just be placed into the market and a doctor could go ahead and use it. And the thing is that if you're, for instance, if this market where you intend to place the product is the US, this could take up, in such a case, 3 to 5 years and up to $50,000. So it's something that you really should consider from the moment you start your product development, since it will, in the case of startup, basically condition your short-term, mid-term future, and at the end of the day, your survival as a company. So yes, so why can you not simply put such a system into production if you did everything correctly? So if you ask the right question, if you develop like a useful solution, you took into account all those ethical considerations, you tested carefully, you deployed thoughtfully. Well, the point is, it's great that you did all that. Now you just have to prove it. And the question is to whom? And I would like to introduce here also a bit of like a global perspective. I will be focusing on the US market because this conference is happening in the US. But I would like to kind of give you like a short overview of other very important regulatory agencies that are overseeing medical devices. So in the US, that's of course the FDA, but in Europe, where I come from, it's the European Commission that writes the legislative proposals, right? And I think that the key point is that although all of these institutions share the same fundamental principles, they all have different legislations. So they are key difference that you should take into account in your strategy, because a product that's a medical device in the US could in Europe just be a wellness or a fitness app. Or it could be that the risk class of your medical device changes from one legislation to another. It can also be that you can use the approval you get in one jurisdiction to speed up the approval in another jurisdiction. So having this global view from the beginning and where you want to enter market first, this really makes a difference. So now focusing on the US, I think, and also a very important point is to understand what the FDA understands as a medical device, which could be slightly different from our, so to say, common thought of what a medical device is, and read carefully the definition, which you will find in the Federal Drug and Cosmetic Act. And then if you read this definition carefully, you will see that certain software functions are excluded for this definition. For instance, the one that just takes the admin processes of dealing with electronic medical records of patients. So really figuring out where the boundaries are, I think that's another key point. That being said, federal laws are intentionally meant to be broad. Then the specifics, you will find them in regulations. And in the case of medical devices, that's in the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21. And I just split it in two parts to show you the following, that basically you will find regulations that apply to medical devices, but that apply to all products that are regulated by the FDA. And then regulations that are specific to medical devices. And some of them are broad, and like having a quality management system in place, like a QMS, and then some of them are for specific type of devices. And then the fact is that sometimes not even regulations are specific enough. Or sometimes, or the fact is that technology advances at a pace that the regulation would simply not be able to keep up with it. And what I really, truly like about the FDA is this capacity the agency has in releasing guidances. And I want to highlight here the mobile medical applications guidelines. And I highlight it here because chances are that some of your products that incorporate AI are an app. So this is not only software as a medical device, so standalone software, this is also like an app, right? So then this guidance is most likely to apply. Then a great thing of these guidelines is that, again, gives you the understanding of the FDA of what's a mobile medical app and what's not considered to be a mobile medical app. And that's really the key point, which applications are considered to be a mobile medical app, but the FDA has decided to enforce oversight discretion because it prefers to focus the agency's efforts into higher risk products. So knowing this kind of information is absolutely vital. And of course, this is a guidance, so it's not legally binding. However, the whole industry takes them extremely seriously because they reflect the agency's thinking about the topic, so they are extremely relevant. So if your product is a medical device, you will have to classify it. And in the US, there are 3 classes for medical devices. Basic idea is the higher the risk your medical device could pose to patients, the higher its risk class. And hence, the more controls you have to pass in order to bring it to the market. That's really the key point. And then depending on this risk class, your evidence could be preclinical testing, it could be animal testing, or it could even be clinical testing. And that's, of course, really what's going to determine basically time and cost, a big part of time and cost. So these 3 to 5 years that I mentioned before and these $50,000, then they really come from this point. So this is also something you really want to think carefully when you define the intended use of your product. Because maybe you have the technical capabilities so that your product has different intended uses, and some of them are more advanced than others. But maybe if you're a startup, you don't have the financials to support that intended use. So maybe you want to start low, so to say, and then as you start to have returns on your investment, then you want to upgrade to a higher risk class, so you want to expand your intended use of your product. And this is the kind of consideration you really have to have. Then I also want to like tell you here like a personal anecdote. So probably you have heard about platforms like Kaggle or AI Crowd. So these are platforms for data scientists to compete. And of course, I like them a lot. And I focus on the field of computer vision. So everything that has to do with images. Medical images, but also not medical images. And there was a very interesting competition from the Institute of Global Health. And they had this great challenge about snakes identification. So I did not know about it, but snakes are a major health problem. They cause 100,000 deaths per year in developing countries and 400,000 injuries. So people working in the fields lose a leg or lose an arm, or, well, children, because they are shorter, they even lose their lives. And this is not a problem, or this is not exclusively a problem of developing countries. It's also a problem of developed countries in rural areas. Because if you happen to be alone in the middle of Iowa and you're bitten by a snake, well, chances are you might die there, right? So that's really like, so I really like this challenge, and I took part of it, and I make it to the top 5, so that was great. And then when I got contacted by the organizers, I asked them, well, how this is going to move forward. And they'd say, well, we pretend to have this app where we put your model, and then so then people are going to take a picture of the snake, and it's going to say that's a boa, that's a python, and if the snake is poisoned, then they are going to get like a treatment recommendation. And I was like, wow, stop, because the thing is, there is again this very fine line. As a company, you might be interested in getting into the regulated market space, because if you look at it from like an industry competitive analysis perspective, like a Porter's 5 forces, this will give you like an entry barrier. As the Institute of Global Health, you're not interested in getting into the regulated market space for medical devices, because what you care is about accessibility. You want your solution to be as fast as possible, like reaching as many people as possible. So the moment you're recommending a treatment and you're placing that app on the Apple Store, you're actually committing a crime, not only in the US, but basically in any jurisdiction you place the app, because you're actually releasing a medical device to the market, right? So of course you could consider like the breakthrough program for medical devices, but you are not interested in going into this space. So just leave it by telling the snake type, it's poisonous, and don't go one step further. That's the point. So have a strategy from the beginning. So depending on the risk class of your device, it will also determine like your pre-market submission types. And these are basically like the most common ones. And I just wanted to show them because I will show you later like a nice infographic of solutions that have already been approved that incorporate AI. And these solutions have followed one of these pathways. And the key thing is these pathways were not meant for AI, for software that incorporates AI. But nevertheless, these solutions make it to the market following these pathways. So that's why I'm showing them to you. So let's say congrats, you make it to the market. That's really big. And then the question is, do your obligations as a manufacturer of like an AI medical device software are done? And I think the big point to take into account is that not. And that I like to summarize the process as a timeline, but it actually should be seen as a cycle, like as a total product life cycle. In terms that you have post-market obligations to ensure the further safety and effectiveness of your product, but also that you really have to keep out watching, right? So this is the infographic I promised, and I know it's pretty dense, but I want to highlight two things about this infographic. First, like it's pretty dense, right? So it means like over 80, so to say, medical devices that incorporate AI that I know of have already made it. And then, and the good news is that this infographic is not even complete, so many may be missing. And then the two other points is that AI is impacting like a broad variety of areas, so from radiology to pathology to cardiology, which is great because it's having a decentralized impact. And then the timeline, like the first one that we know of was 2014. So it's not something happening yesterday, it has already been happening for quite some time now. And now I want to talk about another use case also very close to my work, which is where I see AI having a huge impact for big companies. So for a startup, I see AI being part of the main product, maybe the only product the startup has. For big companies, for big manufacturers like Roche, I foresee AI being part of some of those products. But where I foresee AI having a huge impact is on processes, because we have already many established processes that could be optimized. And I want to talk about one of those processes. So let's say you have an in vitro diagnosed medical device that monitors the concentration of several blood gases and metabolites. And during the production of this medical device, you have a quality control step. So you take pictures of the sensors, and then you have trained operators that basically inspect those pictures visually and decide whether those sensor is good or bad. I mean, this happens at Roche. I'm sure it happens at many other pharmas. So let's say, I said I work in the area of computer vision. So let's say I build a deep learning model using convolutional neural networks that automatizes this process. And my question to you is, can my company just go ahead and put this product into production? And the key aspect is, when you think about it, my solution is not part of the medical device directly, right? But nevertheless, it's part of the quality management system of a medical device. And hence, it cannot be put directly, it cannot directly be deployed and put into production. It needs to be validated. And this is something that applies both in the US and in Europe. And this is, I think, something that most big tech, pharma, and manufacturers will really have to consider, the amount of computer systems validations that thanks to AI, will have to take place. Now, for me, the biggest changes with AI is a shift of paradigm. So before, I used to, so to say, write the code, write the software that would generate lots of data. Now it's the other way around. I use lots of data to generate the software. And this completely changes the game. And to me, this also motivates the need of new frameworks. So these solutions that we have seen before made it to the market using old frameworks, but I see personally this situation as non-ideal because these solutions pose new concerns. So either the old frameworks are adapted by means of a guidance, or there are new frameworks for new technologies. And although this may seem complex, I also see it necessary in the sense that complexity is, in this case, pursuing a very complex goal, which is to ensure the safety of the weakest and to protect the ones that need it the most. So I personally think that as an industry, as a collective, should take this topic very serious. So also coming from academia, I would like now to compare a bit how I see the tools and establish 3 pillars where I see many companies struggling towards like the maturity of AI within their organization. And the 3 pillars are data, model, and infrastructure. So when it comes to model, the focus on academia and industry is completely different. Academia is about finding the right answer to a question. I would say we in industry are aiming to provide a solution to a problem. Then it's not about maybe pushing the state of the art in terms of developing the best models, but it's really about keeping up with these extremely short publication cycles. Like in computer vision, the publication cycles is 3 months. Like, I have to devote every week 2 hours to read new papers, to keep up with it, right? And then see how can I apply these new models that come up, like recently EfficientNet from Google, to our domain with a very specific data. Which brings us to the second pillar. So because academia wants to basically develop the best algorithms, they need to use all the same data sets to benchmark. So these are publicly available data sets. In the case of computer vision, you will hear about ImageNet, you will hear about MNIST, you will hear about CIFAR 100, CIFAR 10. In industry, so to say, every problem has its own new data set, which is usually very domain specific, which means that the models that achieved best performance in academia might not work as well for us because we have a very distinct data set. And I think this is also a very important point to consider. And then I also see a lot of difference between the startup and the big company. Like the startup usually struggles to get the data. And they leverage public available data sets, and this is the main pain point. For the case of big companies that have operating for quite some time in the industry, they usually, if something, have is data. But my point here is that you will hear over and over this statement, data is the new oil. And that's true. And it's so true in the sense that just as with oil, we didn't realize the value of it until quite late. So the problems of a big company can be summarized with like a one word, which is data governance. So who owns the data? Who can access the data? Is my data secure? And then, of course, how good is the quality of my data? Because it was never gathered with, or it was rarely gathered with the purpose of doing analysis like 10 years later. And finally, the last pillar is infrastructure. And here there is a common challenge between academia and industry in the sense that, for instance, in my area, computer visions, not even the data set fits on my computer. Like the data set is sometimes 10 times bigger than the disk drive of my computer. And I would not be ever able to run the computations on my local laptop. So I certainly need a more powerful infrastructure. Then academia can easily, if they have the budget, go to the cloud, like the public cloud. In industry, I think every organization has its own labyrinth that needs to learn how to navigate. Because it's most likely that you already have on-prem infrastructure from 10 years ago. Then you have your private cloud. Then you have your public cloud, which most likely you are right now evaluating vendors. And what I also see is that many of these public clouds are great, and they offer, in terms of breadth, all the services you might need. But in very few cases, they offer the depth that you need. So a recommendation would be choose among the ones you consider the best, and then choose based on the one that engages with you more in that relationship. Because what you really need is customization of many of the services. So for me, this is really the key point when it comes down to infrastructure. And then, of course, avoid platforms that lock you in. Because at least I feel that that's a problem we have with on-prem, and we don't want to repeat the same solution, the same mistake on the cloud. So now I want to come back to this slide, because what I would like to give you now is from a technical perspective of the regulatory things that have been going on in the last years. So we will start on 2017, and we will move onwards. And the first one that I know was China, which on 2017, so now it's renamed, but before it was the Chinese FDA released like a guidance for machine learning applications. And then we had on 2017, like shortly after, South Korea, 2018, Japan, and finally 2019, this April, like the FDA in the United States, right? And China, also this year, but in June, released a guidance for deep learning applications. And I want to praise here the technical quality of this guidance, because I think that as a technical person, I mean, these guidelines in a way are meant for me, right? I should read them and be able to learn best practices, not the other way around. And this guidance really has what I consider to be high technical quality. Then it's meant for deep learning, but it can also be applied to like conventional machine learning. Yeah, and the key point is that it basically describes in which points of your application the National Medical Products Administration, so that's the China FDA that's renamed in like 1 year ago, will be putting the emphasis when evaluating your submission. Then in the United States, the former FDA Commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, he already acknowledged the impact the AI would have for our industry. And I think that the reason why, or maybe the reason why it took a bit longer for the FDA to release a framework, so we are talking 2017 China, and then South Korea, 2018 Japan, and then the FDA only 2018, it's probably because of this other program, the Digital Health Software Pre-Certification Program. Then if before I praised the technical quality, what I would like to praise here is the vision of this program, which basically shifts the focus from the product to the company manufacturing the product. And it allows you to certify as a manufacturer. And once you're certified in one of two levels, it would make you for you easier to bring product to the market, which for big medical manufacturers that you have thousands of products, this is of course a great opportunity. And another thing I would like to emphasize, because I think that's in a way a screenshot of the future of our industry, is which players have taken part as a pilot in this project. So you will find Roche and Johnson & Johnson, which I think it's not, from people from our industry, not a surprise. But then you will have tech companies, right, like Samsung or Apple, like them in like an obvious way, and some of them a bit more in disguise. For instance, like Verily, which is former Google Life Sciences. And Google is actually 2 times on this list because they just bought Fitbit, right? And also before I mentioned strategy, think about, do you want to play in a more regulated market space? Do you want to be a fitness wellness app? But Fitbit is one of these cases that before they said, let's be fitness, let's be wellness, and now they are jumping into the regulated market space now that they have the market. So this is really one of these clever moves. And yes, in April this year, it came out this white paper. So this is not a guidance yet, and the FDA was requesting feedback for it until like last June. And the idea here is it plays very nicely with this other program I just mentioned you. They realize, look, like a problem we have is that under the current framework, if a data scientist wants to update the model, they are most likely going to make changes that requires them to submit, for instance, a new 510K. So this is not what the agency wants, because having to submit a new 510K or a new PMA would demotivate the manufacturer improving the efficiency of the solution. And the FDA, of course, really wants solutions getting better, getting safer for patients. So this is a very brilliant attempt to shortcut this problem and say, hey, what we are going to do here is now, when manufacturers apply for approval, we are going to allow them to basically list a list of changes they foresee, so the what, and then a list of ways they are going to control those changes, so the how. And then we're going to approve those, which I think it also opens a door for approving not only locked algorithm, but continuously learning systems. So I think this is something really, really very interesting, which I'm really looking forward to see how it evolves. So thanks a lot for your attention, and here it's the key message I want you to take out of this presentation, which is I think that all the ones that are in this conference, we are all healthcare innovators. And our goal as healthcare innovators is not to bring an AI product to the healthcare market. I think our goal is to develop a safe and effective solution that will improve the lives of patients worldwide. And that's why your understanding regulatory science is so important to succeed. So thanks a lot.
Are there any questions? Oh, maybe we can take
won't be able to speak to this.
So I'm from Siemens, I forgot to say that. You talked about that device manufacturer that they had to think about their business plan for how it changes. So in what you just talked about the FDA learning systems, how would you think about how that changes your plan of can the system learn and update independently, or do you take that information back and update in the development process?
Yeah. So I think companies will have still the option, right? I mean, you can, so to say, have like a locked model, and then once your device is placed on the field, you gather all this data, but you don't improve the performance of your system, you keep it locked, and then you do as you do now, like software releases. Like, so that would be version 1, version 2, version 3. And that would be, I would say, like the lowest risk option, because it's essentially the more traditional approach. Then what about if you want to do like automatic updates? Because you would have the technical capabilities of it, right? You could just update your software. Then I think that what becomes here crucial is how good you are at monitoring the performance of your system, so that you have something like a continuous deployment, continuous integration for machine learning, so that you're really able to test it well. And honestly, I find it promising. I think it's something that companies should explore, because it opens great horizons for the adaptability of your system. The fact that, for instance, it's able to adapt to like a local population. And also then there is the topic of federated learning, like being able to update your model, right, without sending this data. Also, I think federated learning is something that healthcare companies have to really look at.
Maybe one comment. Very nice presentation. I really liked it. Now the next dimension is starting, and there is the German government last Friday. They approved in the parliament a law that is called the Digital Supply Law, that from January 1st on, doctors can subscribe apps to patients as the first country in the world. So at the moment, nobody really knows how the reimbursement looks like, because there is 2 months to work on it and to go live. And it's going to be also the first time that artificial intelligence apps will be reimbursed, like symptom checkers, to triage patients. So far, the reimbursement only works with doctors, so doctors get the money reimbursed. So now they also need to reimburse tech companies, which is also very new. The biggest challenge now is that most of the apps are consumer-driven or built for consumers. But in this reimbursement system, it only works when you have also the doctor included. So 80% of the apps, they will never get a reimbursement because they are not really made for the doctors. And the law is made for the startups. So you only need to go through a very easy approval process, and you get it reimbursed, and you have 1 year time to build a business case to justify an added value to the health system that it continues to be reimbursed. So it's mostly going into long-term care patients. So areas where Roche is very active means long-term treatments of diabetes patients, of obesity patients, of whatever patients. So have a look on that. So it's going to give you a new dimension.
I think the future is going to be quite interesting regulatory-wise. Thanks a lot.